Motivation is the invisible force that drives almost everything we do. It's what gets us out of bed in the morning, makes us set goals, and pushes us to chase after things we believe will improve our lives. But it's also the same force that seems to disappear when we need it most. We often start something with so much energy, only to lose steam halfway through and wonder why we can't keep going. To understand this, we need to look at what motivation really is and how our brain responds to it. At its core, motivation comes from a simple equation. We act when we believe the reward is worth the effort. Our brain is constantly calculating this balance, how much energy something will cost, and what we stand to gain if we succeed. When the reward feels meaningful, we feel motivated. When the effort feels too heavy or the reward too distant, our motivation fades. There are two main drivers of motivation: seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Sometimes we're motivated because we want something, a better body, a higher grade, a new job, recognition, or even something as small as a piece of chocolate. Other times we're motivated to avoid discomfort, like the fear of failure, the stress of being unprepared, or the shame of letting others down. Most of our daily actions are a mix of both, even when we don't realize it. When we start something new, motivation is usually high because our brain loves novelty. A new project, a new routine, or a new goal gives us a surge of energy. We imagine the end result, picture the reward, and that image excites us. But as time passes, the novelty wears off. The brain stops getting the same reward from simply thinking about it, and the effort starts to feel heavier than the potential payoff. That's when quitting feels easier than pushing forward. Another factor is instant versus delayed gratification. Our brain is wired to prefer immediate rewards. That's why scrolling on your phone, eating junk food, or skipping the gym feels so tempting. Those actions reward you instantly. On the other hand, building a skill, staying consistent with exercise, or saving money offers rewards that are weeks, months, or even years away. The farther away the reward, the harder it is for our brain to stay motivated. We also quit when the gap between expectation and reality grows too wide. At the start of a goal, people often imagine fast results and smooth progress. But real progress is usually slow, filled with setbacks, and much less glamorous than we picture. When reality doesn't match the dream, the mind tells us it's not worth continuing. This disappointment drains motivation more than the actual difficulty of the task. Emotion plays another big role. Motivation isn't just logical, it's deeply emotional. When we feel stressed, anxious, or hopeless, the energy to stay consistent disappears. On the other hand, when we feel excited, supported, or optimistic, our motivation grows. That's why the same task can feel impossible one day and effortless the next. Our emotional state changes, how motivated we feel to tackle it. There's also the question of identity. Motivation is strongest when the action aligns with how we see ourselves. If someone thinks of themselves as a healthy person, they're more likely to stay consistent with exercise and good food choices. If someone sees themselves as a lifelong learner, they'll naturally stay motivated to study and grow. But if a goal feels disconnected from our identity, it always feels like a struggle. We might force ourselves for a while, but eventually the lack of connection makes us quit. Our environment shapes motivation as well. Being surrounded by distractions, negative people, or environments that don't support our goals makes quitting almost inevitable. On the other hand, being in an environment that reinforces progress, celebrates small wins, and reminds us of the reward can make staying consistent much easier. Motivation also works like a muscle. It isn't always about feeling inspired. It's about building discipline through small, consistent actions. Every time we follow through on a task, no matter how small, we train our brain to expect success and link effort with reward. When we skip too often, we train the opposite. Our brain learns that quitting is easier and more comfortable. Over time, this habit becomes stronger than any initial burst of motivation. The truth is, motivation isn't a steady fuel that lasts forever. It rises and falls, influenced by our emotions, our environment, and the way our brain calculates effort versus reward. That's why starting feels easy, because excitement and novelty give us an extra push, but continuing feels hard, because real progress demands persistence when the excitement fades. When motivation drops, most people think they need to wait until they feel ready again. But this is where the mind plays tricks on us. If we only act when motivation feels strong, we'll never build consistency, because that feeling comes and goes. Instead, the key is to understand how to work with the brain systems and create conditions where motivation has no choice but to return. One of the most powerful techniques is breaking big goals into smaller, achievable steps. Our brain loves progress, and even tiny wins release a sense of reward that fuels more effort. If we only focus on the long journey ahead, it feels overwhelming and our motivation vanishes. But if we focus on just the next step, the next workout, the next page of a book, the next small improvement, we create momentum. Momentum is often more important than motivation because it carries us forward even when we don't feel like moving. Another way to sustain motivation is by creating clear reminders of why the goal matters. The brain is quick to forget long-term rewards, so we need visual or emotional cues that bring them back into focus. Writing down goals, using vision boards, setting reminders, or surrounding ourselves with symbols of progress helps keep the end reward alive in our mind. Without these cues, the brain defaults to seeking short-term comfort, which leads us to quit. It's also important to understand the role of accountability. Humans are wired for social connection, and when other people are aware of our goals, we feel an extra push to stay consistent. This doesn't mean relying entirely on others for discipline, but sharing progress, joining supportive groups, or even tracking publicly can strengthen motivation. The fear of letting ourselves down is strong, but the fear of letting others down can sometimes be stronger. Emotion regulation plays a big part too. Many times we quit not because the task is impossible, but because we allow stress, frustration, or boredom to dominate the experience. If we can change how we interpret these emotions, motivation lasts longer. For example, seeing frustration as a sign of growth rather than failure, or seeing boredom as a natural part of the process rather than a reason to stop, rewires the way we respond. This shift reduces the emotional weight that drains motivation. Another factor is rewards along the way. The brain needs reinforcement, so attaching small rewards to effort makes the process feel lighter. The key is not to wait until the very end for a payoff, but to build in positive feedback regularly. This doesn't have to be material. It could be a break, a moment of celebration, or even just acknowledging the progress made. When effort is paired with reward, the brain learns to enjoy the process itself. The truth about long-term goals is that discipline often carries us when motivation is weak. But discipline isn't something we're born with. It's something we train. Each time we choose to act even without feeling motivated, we strengthen that skill. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. Discipline keeps us consistent. Consistency produces results, and results renew motivation. It's not about waiting for motivation. It's about creating conditions where motivation keeps coming back. Another subtle but powerful tool is identity alignment. If we link our goals to who we want to be rather than just what we want to achieve, motivation feels natural. For example, instead of thinking, I want to exercise to lose weight, thinking, I am the kind of person who takes care of my body, makes the action part of identity. When behavior and identity are connected, quitting feels like betraying ourselves, which makes persistence much stronger. Finally, it helps to expect setbacks rather than fear them. Most people quit after the first major obstacle because they see it as proof they're failing. In reality, setbacks are part of the motivational cycle. They test whether the reward still matters and whether we're willing to adjust. If we see setbacks as data, not defeat, they lose their power to drain motivation. Motivation, in the end, is not about endless energy or constant excitement. It's about understanding how the brain works, how emotions guide us, and how our environment shapes our choices. When we learn to work with these forces instead of against them, we no longer rely on fleeting bursts of motivation. Instead, we create a system where progress becomes inevitable, and quitting no longer feels like the easiest option. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to start something new? Maybe it's the first day at the gym, the first page of a journal, or the first few hours of learning a new skill. In that moment, you feel unstoppable, like nothing can get in your way. But then days later, that fire seems to fade. The same workout feels like a chore, the journal gathers dust, and the new skill suddenly feels too complicated. Why does this always happen? It's because our brain loves beginnings. It rewards us with excitement when we chase something fresh. But that same brain also loves comfort. And comfort often wins once the novelty fades. This is why people quit. It's not because they're weak or lazy, but because they're human. The brain is wired to protect energy and avoid discomfort, even if that means giving up on something important. So how do we fight back? Think about the last time you kept going even when you didn't feel like it. Maybe you pushed through a difficult class, finished a long project, or stuck to a habit longer than you thought possible. What helped you? Chances are it wasn't just raw willpower. Maybe you had small wins along the way that kept you moving. Maybe you had someone cheering you on. Or maybe you reminded yourself why it mattered in the first place. Those are the same tools you can use again. What if we stopped waiting to feel motivated and instead built systems that carry us forward? Imagine breaking a big goal into tiny, almost laughable steps, so small that your brain can't say no. Imagine creating reminders around you that keep your purpose alive every single day. Imagine rewarding yourself not just when you reach the finish line, but for showing up in the middle when it feels hardest. And here's something powerful. What if you started to see yourself as the kind of person who doesn't quit? Not someone who sometimes exercises, but someone who lives a healthy lifestyle. Not someone who sometimes studies, but someone who is a lifelong learner. When your actions match your identity, quitting doesn't even feel like an option anymore. The truth is, motivation will always rise and fall. You'll have days when you feel unstoppable, and days when you don't want to move at all. But if you understand why motivation fades, and you know how to spark it again, you'll stop seeing quitting as the only way out. Instead, you'll see it as a challenge, a test your brain is giving you to see if the reward still matters. And if it does, you'll keep going. So the next time you feel yourself losing motivation, pause and ask, am I chasing too big of a step? Do I need a reminder of why this matters? Am I waiting for motivation to magically come back, or am I willing to create it? Because in the end, the difference between those who quit and those who succeed isn't that one group always feels motivated. It's that one group learns to keep moving even when motivation is gone. And that's the real psychology of motivation. We start because the dream excites us. We quit because the journey tests us. But if we understand the game our brain is playing, we can learn to keep going long after the excitement fades. And that's when real change begins.